Hey guys, MBSC1 again. Sorry about the lack of videos over the past 2 weeks. I've been focusing really hard on trying to practice for regionals, and regionals was last weekend, so now I have time to focus on making videos again. And so I'm going to be posting this list, and then a Trevenant Acceleror list, and then a Rizian Genesect deck list, and maybe another one this week. So I'll have a lot of videos up for you guys this week. But for this video, this is my Seismitoad Seismitoad Aromatisse deck list, and I got 23rd with this list, and it performed really well for me. My only 2 losses were just because I didn't have enough time to finish out the second game, and if we did finish the second game, I most likely would have won and gotten a tie. So I think this deck is really good, and I encourage you guys to try it. Alright, so we'll start off the Pokemon here. This is probably pretty obvious, but 3 Seismitoad. I really wanted to have 3 Seismitoad just so that I can make sure I start with it more often than not. I'd like to have 4, but really 4 I just didn't have the room for it, so 3 seemed consistent enough. And it's really just all I could fit, so yeah. And then 2 Darkrai. Some lists for this deck run 1 Darkrai, and even I had 1 Darkrai at one point, but really I just realized you need that consistency of having 2, because when you have 1 prized, it hurts really bad. So I upped it to 2, and I've liked it like that and kept it like that ever since. Then we have 3 Aromatisse. I actually can't find my 3rd Aromatisse, so that's a Slurpuff, but just pretend it's Aromatisse. I had 2 originally, and 2 is nice, but I realized that when I was going against other Toad decks, when they locked me out of items, it hurt really bad not being able to have that 3rd one, so I cut my 4th Ultra Ball for a 3rd Aromatisse, which was my buddy Chris Collins' idea. He's a really good player. Anyway, yeah, I really like the thick line like this, and also if you have 1 prized, it's nice having 3. Then there's 3 Spritzy. This just goes out consistently turn 1. A lot more often than 2. 2 just isn't enough, especially if your opponent Lysanders or Catchers or Red Signals 1 out, then you really need to have the 3rd one, just because 1 Aromatisse usually isn't enough, at least for me. And then for the techs, we have 1 Malamar. This is the MVP tech in this deck. Every time you Quaking Punch, you also have them asleep because of Malamar. So it basically means that your opponent can only attack 50% of the time when they wake up from sleep. So if you think about it like that, this is kind of like a soft lock deck, which is why I like it a lot. I always prefer the control decks and the lock decks. So that's basically why I love this deck, is because of Malamar. A lot of times, you know, your opponent has a response to that, which is usually Rizian or Keldeo, but you can stop Keldeo because item lock stops them from putting down Floatstones, so really their only opportunity to get Keldeo Floatstone going is like turn 1 and sometimes turn 2 if you can't get the turn 2 Quaking Punch off. So yeah, and then there's Cobalion. This is here for a couple reasons. The biggest reason is to you go through safeguard Pokemon like Suicune and Sigilyph. There's really nothing else that can kill those Pokemon in this deck besides Cobalion, so we need just 1 of for that. Also, the metal typing is good against fairies, and even some ice types. And then the other final reason is because Righteous Edge discards special energy, so if you're against another Toad deck, you can bring Cobalion up and Righteous Edge their double colorless energy off, which helps a lot against Toad Puff. Well, mostly against Toad Garb, but also helps a little bit against Toad Puff. Toad Puff is kind of a tough matchup for this deck, actually. I think it's pretty 50-50. It's probably the worst matchup for this deck besides Rizian Genesect, which is good if you consider the fact that it's a 50-50 matchup, because that means that the only real 50-50 matchup is against Toad Puff. So it's important you have something to counter Toad. Then the other Toad counter is Rizian. This isn't really necessarily there to counter Toad, but it helps because of Verdant Wind. This deck runs Rainbow Energy, so you stop special conditions. That's really important when you have no Darkrai in play, but mostly just because you want to stop the special conditions. If you're not using Quaking Punch, then they can play lasers against you, so it's important that you have it. But it's not a super quick priority if you're using Toad, because you can just lock them out of playing lasers anyway. And then finally, Yveltal. This is helpful for a lot of reasons. Biggest reason is if your opponent loads up something with a lot of energy, specifically like a Yveltal or something like that, and you need to KO it really quickly before it starts one-shotting everything, then you can put down this Yveltal and then one-shot it to wipe that energy off your opponent's board. Also helpful against fighting decks like Landorus Bats or fighting bats, I guess, because they have Lucario too. And then just, Donphan helps against Donphan a little bit too. It's just a solid attacker if you don't want to use Seismitoad, and it can do a lot of damage. This deck can't really do a lot of damage unless you're using Yveltal, so it's important that you have that energy that can do a lot of damage. Also, Malamar's attack won me 3 games at Regionals. It lost me 1 too because I had 6 energy on it, and I flipped 2 heads instead of 3 heads to take the knockout, which actually is pretty unlikely for that to happen, but Maximar is actually a decent attack to close out games sometimes too. So that is all the Pokemon. I tried to keep the text down because this deck is mostly about consistency, and most of the texts are just there for effects anyway. So yeah, that's all the Pokemon. Support line is probably the toughest part about the deck. The toughest part about this deck for me was getting a good draw support line. So 4N is standard in every deck pretty much. I don't know why you would really run less unless you're super aggressive or something like that, or unless you're running Execute or Executor, which is actually a pretty good deck that I'll probably do a profile on later. But anyway, yeah, 4N standard, 4 Sycamore also standard, and then this deck actually runs 3 Chorus, which is a pretty high count, and it kind of stinks starting with it early game. I actually really don't like that I start with this early game a lot. That's the biggest problem for this deck, is having bad starts. I noticed that early game I can get something besides or an N or Sycamore a lot, because really the only good supporters I have are N and Sycamore. So a lot of players run Jirachi in this deck, and I think that's probably a pretty good idea, but in my testing I just really didn't need it that often. But once I actually went to regionals, I realized that there was a lot of times where Jirachi would have been helpful. But the downside to Jirachi is this deck is very bench intensive, meaning that you really need your bench slots. So that's why I didn't want to put the Jirachi in. But in hindsight, I think I probably should have put it in because you can use AZ to pick it back up later. But I don't know. It's a pretty tough call to make, but in hindsight, I think that's probably the only card I would change in this list, is putting in a Jirachi. Then there's 3 Verse Seeker. This is a super powerful card, probably one of the best cards in the format. Gets you just back any supporter. It can get you those one-ofs like Lysander's trump card and AZ. AZ is in here so that you can win against Toad decks. Like I said, Toadpuff is pretty much the hardest matchup besides Vrisian Genesect, so I wanted to have more than one counter for it, so that's why AZ is in here. I used to have Xerosic, but Xerosic actually ended up having pretty much no use for me. It sounds like it's good in theory, on paper it's pretty good, but in testing and in reality, Xerosic was not good for me at all. Lysander's trump card is extremely important in this deck. I used it probably 60 to 75% of games, just recovering all those max potions that you have in the deck, and all the lasers and the muscle bands is super good because then you can just keep max potioning every single turn while locking your opponent out of items and doing damage. So that's definitely important in this deck. If you're thinking about not running it, you definitely should. And then the last of the supporters is just 2 Lysander. I like these effect supporter line. I like it a lot. I don't really think I need Pokemon Center Lady. AZ is just strictly better than Pokemon Center Lady in this deck because you can just move the energy off, so there's no real downside to AZ. If anything, put in a second AZ. It's super helpful. I like it a lot. And it also gave me that extra healing boost when I ran out of max potions, which can happen sometimes. So, yeah, overall I really like the support line. The only thing I don't like is that I don't have more early game supporters. Like maybe Shauna or Skyla might be good additions if you don't like Jirachi. 1 computer search, super good ice spec. I don't know what else I would run besides maybe Scoop Up Cyclone, but even with Scoop Up Cyclone, I don't think you really get as good effect as computer search. It just helps with that consistency. Like I said, early game hurts sometimes with supporters, so you can computer search for a supporter, maybe computer search for DCE, or get one of your 4 techs. Computer search is just super good to help out with this deck because it needs that extra consistency boost. 2 Verbank. I'd like to run 3, but I can't really fit it, and this deck actually isn't very laser based. This deck, my list at least, focuses more on locking while you heal rather than doing a lot of damage with lasers. So I only have 2 Verbank, but 2 Verbank is pretty standard. I cut the laser count down to 3, which is pretty low for this kind of deck, but it just came down to 4 lasers or 4 max potion, and I I really felt I needed that 4th max potion, and if I could go back and do it again, I'd do the same pick again. I think 4 max potion is more important than 4 lasers, and if you look at this list, like, you really can't cut anything. So yeah, I think that's the right call. 3 3 Ultra Ball. I'd like to have 4, especially since I'm on Team Ultra, but like I said, that Aromatisse was what had to get put in, so I had to cut an Ultra Ball for it. And I really don't mind the 3 Ultra Ball, actually. Now after using it at regionals and testing it a lot, I think 3 Ultra Ball is fine. 4 might help a little bit, but you know, I think 3 is enough. 3 Muscle Band, that's one of the counts that I boosted up. I thought that 2 wasn't enough when I was originally testing this, so I opted to 3. Headringer was a major problem for me with this deck, so I think 3 Muscle Band is very important. I would even consider a Headringer, or I mean not Headringer, Tool Retriever, or maybe just another AZ so that you can get rid of those Headringers, because they're so painful when your opponent gets them on the 1st or 2nd turn. So that's why 3 Muscle Band is very important. Maybe even put in a 4th if you can find room, but you probably can't because this list is very packed. And then 4 Max Potion. I would not do any less than 4 Max Potion. This deck really needs 4 Max Potion because you're hitting for so little damage with Seismitoad. You really need to keep healing so that your opponent can't kill you or knock you out, because usually they're 2-shotting you while you're 3-shotting them, because that's just how slow Toad is, but they're not 2-shotting you because you keep max potioning. So I think max potion is incredibly important in this deck. I would not do any less than 4 under pretty much any circumstances. So that's it for the items, and then as far as energy go, just 4 Rainbow, 4 Fairy, and 3 DCE. This energy count isn't ideal. I noticed I was having problems because I needed more energy when I was using this at regionals. So if you can find room, put in a 5th Fairy. I know I've said that with like 3 different cards so far, but really this list is super packed, and that's the main problem. But yeah, I think another energy would be good, just because you want to keep being able to use Malamar's ability to put him to sleep. Because after you get those 5 energy in play, then you can't really use Malamar's Hyper Hypnosis anymore. So that happened a couple times for me, and you know, just that extra boost and consistency from another energy would be nice. Oh, and the 3 DCs, I feel like I should explain this a little bit. It's just really important to get Quaking Punch turn 1. So that's why you have the 3 DCs. I also noticed that it helps with damage for Yveltal. A couple times I attached a DC to Yveltal so that I could Evil Ball for more damage and take a 1-shot knockout. And then even on top of that, it helped with Malamar. 2 of the times when I won games with Maximar, it was because I had a DCE on it so that I could Maximar with 6 energy or 7 energy, and DCE helped a lot with that. But it's mostly there just so that, you know, on the first turn you can attach it to Seismitoad and Quaking Punch. And not being able to move it kind of stinks, but being able to Quaking Punch that early will usually buy you time so that your opponent won't be able to put enough damage to 2-shot you early game anyway. So overall, I like this deck a lot. It's, you know, it's a control deck, it's a lock deck, which is definitely my favorite type of deck. And so if you like that type of thing, then you might want to give it a go. It probably will be good in with the next set Primal Clash out too, so give it a shot. So that's it for this list. I hope you guys liked it. I really like this deck a lot. It performed extremely well for me, and even with the consistency problems it has sometimes, it still winds up on top. It usually has slow starts, but it still manages to control the game towards the middle to end of it. So don't be discouraged if you have bad starts a lot with this deck, because it still can control games and win them later on. I like to say, who cares if it's consistent if it wins? So yeah, so that's the end of the video. Like if you liked it, comment if you want to tell me something, and subscribe for more.